Um,
Hello, everyone. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, coming to you from the beautiful Rogue River in Southern Oregon with our Secret of Light discussion group, where we discuss Walter Russell and all things about the wave and about radiation and gravitation. We will get into these subjects today, and we're going to explore part 3 of Walter Russell's Secret of Light. We are, I think, in the 4th part of part 3 now, where we're going to talk a bit about the wave, and we're going to talk a bit about the two opposite electric directions to begin with, and then we're going to get into more in-depth ideas of how Walter Russell sees the Earth and how radiation and gravitation affects the Earth and the people and humans on it, and how that will affect how we view the wave within our life form and within our universe. So before we get started, I'd like to actually review a little bit from last week, because there are a couple of very important things to remember. And if you don't remember them, this week may be a little tough. So the first thing I want to talk a little bit about is, again, to remember the idea of the dynamic and the static axis that Walter Russell talked about. So when Walter Russell talked, he said that when you have the two polar conditions, the positive, which is the gravitation, and the negative, which is the radiation, which is cold, the positive is hot, but they're also offset by volume. So volume of the idea that space is a very large volume and that the planets are a very small concentrated volume, that there is a disparate ratio between the two. But when we think about that, when we see this diagram here, can everyone see this diagram of this battery that's kind of small on one side and large on the other? The idea is that this orange axis here, which we call the static axis, actually will move closer towards the small. So this we would consider as the planet Earth being a very small condensed area, and this we would see as space as a large expanse. So as this axis here between the positive and the negative, which is kind of the sun and the Earth contrast, this axis will move closer towards the area of lesser volume, which would be the concentration of the planets, versus the expanse of space. And from that, as this axis moves towards the smaller area, a cone is formed with the larger end in space and the concentrated end on the planets. And this is then reversed for as the wave returns back to source. So this is how matter is made incarnate in the 3D on Earth. And then the second half of the wave, as expansion and radiation takes place, it will expand back out and go back to source. And as it grows, on the end, it just gets larger and larger and eventually goes into nothingness. So I want to keep the ideas of this dynamic and the static axis. So the orange is the static axis, and the yellow is the dynamic axis equators that we talked about. So these are actually the dynamic equators. So I kind of like the term axis, but the actual term is equator. So with that, we're going to get started on this week, which we're going to start with, like I said, the two opposites electrical directions. And any questions before we start on the dynamic and static equators within what Walter Russell talks about, and how one is offset by the other because one is smaller, and it's actually the location of the static axis is closer to the smaller volume than the larger volume, and that creates a curvature. So let's go ahead and get started. If there's no questions, any questions before I get started, or ideas of what I just talked about? Okay, so we're going to talk about here's the two opposite electric directions. The universe is dual. The still magnetic universe of reality and the dynamic electric radial two-way universe of illusion. Now, when Walter Russell talks about the universe of illusion, we've covered this before, but I want to repeat it again for those who may not have watched the whole series and may be coming into this, because it's a very important point. There was two aspects that Walter Russell really wanted to stress within his home study course and within his books. The first was that everything originates from source. There is one source and all things originate from source. All knowing originates from source and comes into being in a 3D reality through polarities, through becoming two polarities, and those polarities create tension and dynamic waveforms, and those waveforms create matter. Those waveforms create matter, and then they disintegrate and go back to source. So from source into matter, from matter back to source. That is the wave. That is how Walter Russell views the world. But with that being said, he said that all things are an illusion because they are not stationary. They are constantly in motion and changing. And the way that he viewed reality was, it was a cinematic projection. That what we see, what we believe to be real, is really just like us watching a movie, that it is not a reality, but it seems to be because of motion. And when we see motion and time, we believe things to be real when they're really just a recording, just as a tape player or a movie on film. So those are the two things. So when you see the idea of the two-way, which is the way the wave works, positive and negative, and again, it's better explained as charge and discharge because each have charge. It's not like one has a charge and the other one doesn't. It just, they're equal and opposite in their polarities. So the two-way universe of illusion, which extends from the static universe, which we talked about, right, and the angle of 90 degrees, at the angle of 90 degrees. So, you know, when I brought this diagram in from last week's discussion, where we're seeing the orange here, which is what we call the static equator, which actually, if you look at the way he sees the Earth as a sphere, that this axis is on the east and west equator. So it's on the equator of the Earth. All right. Now, again, he has it on its side. So he has, you know, north and south in the horizontal and east and west in the vertical in this diagram that he's showing in his drawing. So south is negative, north is positive, south is cold, north is hot. North is gravitation, south is radiation. This in the center is when we see a planet as it's formed, as a sphere, as it goes into its second phase of its life cycle, into the radiation side of the cycle, it begins to obligate, which means that it becomes, in the middle, you start seeing rings formed. It begins to disintegrate in the middle. It becomes more and more as an oval and less as a sphere. And then those rings begin to push out matter and asteroids and belts. And then those belts then will be sucked up back into the sun, back into source. Again, that's Walter Russell's cosmology. I'm not saying that that's what everybody should believe. I'm just saying that's the way that Walter Russell explains it. So again, this is the diagram, figure 27. Matter is formed between opposite poles in waves. So as we see here, we see these arrows going in, which are the concentrative force to the center, which is gravitation. Gravitation is not pulling in from the center, it's pushing out from the outside towards the center. So unlike Newton's theories where the apple's falling to Earth because it's being pulled to the Earth, the idea is that it's actually being pushed towards the Earth through gravitation. Okay, then once the gravitation reaches its ultimate, its apex, it then begins to expand back out through radiation and begins the disintegration process. So what's often said is that Newton only saw one half of the wave. He saw the apple fall. He didn't see it deteriorate. He didn't see it decompose and go back into source and back into the atmosphere as things begin to break apart. So he only saw one side of the wave. And so that's at 90 degrees. So as you see here, we have this, what we call the dynamic aspect and the static. So this is at 90 degrees to this dynamic axis between north and south. Any questions so far on just the first statement? All right. So in the dynamic electric universe, there are two directions: inward, red, hot, negative, and positive, sorry, and outward, blue, cold, negative. Radially from a still point of magnetic light to still planes of magnetic light. So a point is just, really one-dimensional, right? Just a point. A plane can actually become a two-dimensional object, but once you give it some actual thickness, then it becomes a three-dimensional object and a solid. All motion within magnetic wave field. So a field is actually where we're actually getting into a three-dimensional concept. So we go from a wave, which is really a two-dimensional concept, to a field, which is a three-dimensional concept. And he says that that is all controlled by the creator. Now, when he says creator, he doesn't really have any religious connotations that I know of. I mean, I would say that he would lean what we'd say to Christian, because he did believe that Christ was an ascended master, but he wouldn't really be considered a Christian by what we would call today as, conservative Christianity or some of those other ideas, or literal Christian from a biblical perspective. He had other concepts of ascended masters and reincarnation and other things. So he might have been seen as a Gnostic, a Christian Gnostic maybe, but not as a conventional Christian that we may think of today. So when we see the word creator, he's actually calling that source, that all things, again, from his number one concept, start with source, and that's where all things originate, within knowing, which is formless, and from there, all idea and all creative thinking comes. And so Walter Russell wrote, guys, go ahead.
Is that me, or are you choppy? Is anyone else seeing it? Sound is really choppy for me. That's probably me.
Is my sound choppy for you guys? No? Okay.
So it's just me. I may have to reconnect.
No.
Okay. So one of the first books that Walter Russell wrote, as we all know, is called The Divine Iliad. And what that was a download that Walter Russell experienced before he began his journey. And in that, he wrote this book. So what he did, he wrote this book, and when you ever see the word I, it's not referring to Walter Russell, it's actually referring to the creator or source speaking. So it would be, Walter Russell writing about what the creator is telling him. So within this, it says, "For behold, I am within all things, centering them, and I am without all things, controlling them." So as we see this figure here in figure 29, where we have these inward gravitational things going into the centering force, God is saying, I am within all things. And then we have an opposite here in 30, where it's going from the centered outward. So this is a depiction of gravitation. This is a depiction of radiation. So he says that God is in all this, and God or source is in all this. So all things, he is in all things, and he is out of all things. So it encompasses all things. Again, this here is just a repeating of what the first one said. So the inward, again, red, radial direction, red, positive, male, north. North is north, compressive direction of gravity, which multiplies potential. Again, these are some concepts we talked about last week, is that as things become concentrated, their potential becomes higher. by compressing light waves radially into smaller volumes of greater frequency. So as they compress, their potential is raised and their frequency is raised and made higher. So as they become more and more compressed, their frequencies become higher and higher. All right. The outward radial direction is south, the expansive direction of radiation, which divides potential by expanding light waves into larger volumes of lesser frequencies. So as we move farther out into space, the void gets larger, space gets larger, the frequencies become less, and the area becomes, and the light waves are expanded. So that's why we begin to get darkness, because it's not as light as when we get into compressed areas where that is very, very hot, like within the sun itself, which is a condensing sphere. The two directions of the static universe, again, the static is that, area we talked about, are east and west. So if we go back to this diagram again, this is the static equator that he talks about. This is east and west. This is the dynamic equator, north and south. So as we talk about the static universe of east and west and the static equator, are east and west. They are static because they are spherical. Spherical. They follow curved planes of unchanging equal potential pressures, such as the contour of the Earth or Sun or the orbits or floating clouds, east and west. Do not oppose each other. Each arrives at its own starting point without change of potential. So what he's saying is that this east and west is spherical. It's the way the clouds run. They don't run up and down this way. You'll see, again, is it a psyop? I don't know. But when you see the pictures of our hemisphere, they're running east and west. Again, this is what Walter Russell is saying. So if you're going to say that, concepts are in alignment with Walter Russell, these are the things that must be in line to be in line with Walter Russell. If they're not saying these things, they're not in line with Russell or Russell science. So north and south, on the contrary, diametrically oppose each other. They are constantly changing. They seek opposite directions, each passing through the other in opposite spiral lanes, each interchanging with the other as it passes, each voiding the other through that interchange and becoming that other because of it. So if we look at figure 33 here, here's figure 31 that we talked about, which was the positive, and we see the waves. So we see how the waves are large here? That is as they go out into space. And see how they get real close here? As they get closer to the apexes, which we talked about, right? So this is very, very, very dense, high frequency waves. These are larger, lower frequency waves as they get out into space. And this is the cone shape that we talked about earlier also. The division and multiplication principle. So let's go look down here and look at figure 33. So here's east and west that we were talking about. So it's a spherical shape. And this is figure 33 here, which is basically a nebula. And they're constantly, voiding each other that we talked about. So we constantly have this interchange of a sphere. We see this in the universe. We see this in nebulas. We see this throughout, what we would call astronomy. And Walter Russell saying that that's what he thinks also. So east and west spherical planes form the axis of tight waves from which the dynamic universe extends its gyroscopic wave radially at amplitudes of 90 degrees and also its other gyroscopic octave tones at the varying degrees of pressure which elements of matter are formed. So when we talk about pressure, as we get in here, pressure and potential are are similar words in Walter Russell's vocabulary. So as we get closer in, the pressure gets higher, the density gets more. As we move out, the pressure gets less, and the waveform and the expanse and volume gets greater also. So as we look at this, we begin to see this varying degrees of pressure, right? And this is what we talk about. So that's why, you know, as you go into the ocean, right, what happens? Pressure increases, right?
What?
As you go into space, what happens? You lose, right? I mean, you begin to float, right? I mean, you begin to float around. I mean, the pressure, the whole thing will decrease per Russell's theory or his cosmology here. So as we see that happen, this is the reason why, because it goes to the center of the spherical object, of the mass that is containing the gravitation, until that then reverses and begins to expand back into radiation. So east-west spherical planes are also the fulcrums of wave levers which curve gravity. All right, we're talking about this curvature of gravity. As they pump high potential into expand solids into the gases of space, and low potential into high to compress light waves into the solids of Earth. So these light waves that we're talking about, as they begin to gravitate, as they begin to condense, these are what we would call the visible light spectrums, right? Those visible light spectrums actually begin to form mass and form solids. That's why, you know, we see them, right? That's why we can identify them. As they expand out, they get outside of our visible spectrum, and they begin to turn into different, lesser, lighter forms of light until they return back to the sun, where they are condensed again into the sun itself. And that's why the sun is a gravitational sphere, which sends off radiation radially that then comes to the Earth and then is condensed again. So incandescent suns, so we've got figure 34 here. I wish I had the figures on the same page. So as you guys remember, this was one of the very first diagrams we looked at, which was actually of God or of love, where we see the wave here. And the wave actually, as you remember, starts at this point here to that point there. That is what Walter Russell considers the wave cycle. Again, when we see this line here, this is the dynamic axis, right? Or equator. The dynamic equator is right here. This is the static equator at 90 degrees to the dynamic. North, south, east, west. East, west, north, south. Wave cycle from here to here, going through a point of rest at 0 and inflection. We could call this positive, we could call this negative on the base, returning back to positive this way as the wave turns. So incandescent suns of white hot light are born from cold black darkness and cold dark space. So as the coldness reaches its apex, it then will shift from radiation to gravitation and begin to form white hot. So this is part of the wave cycle. That's why as we go through this cycle, all things will expand, all things will contract, and it's happening simultaneously. So there was a question that Brian asked, what are the frequencies? The frequencies are varied based upon the cycle that we look at. Again, Lao Tzu said, the fool lives in circles, the wise lives in cycles. We see these cycles occurring throughout life. They don't start and end, they are continuous. We aren't born and then die and go away. We incarnate gravitation, we deincarnate radiation, back into incarnation, gravitation, back to decarnation, radiation. That is the cycle of life. That is the wave. So, you know, as we see these they are born from white hot suns. So when we see the curved electric universe, these are some of the ideas we talked about earlier. All suns are generated into incandescence by two black rivers of evacuated light, which flow centripetally. Now, when you see the word centripetal, that is red, that is positive, that is a flow, a clockwise actual direction. So these are these two evacuated lights which flow centripetally. When we see the word centrifugally, that is radiation, that is cold, that is blue, that is negative. So the centripetal inward toward their still centers by the way of their poles. Conversely, darkness of space is radiated from two incandescent rivers of white light, which flow centrifugally from sun's equators. Right? So let's go back a little bit here and just review the ideas of, you know, the equators that we talked about at the very, very beginning, just so that we kind of get an idea again what we're talking about here. And maybe I'll just take this, see if I can move it down where we're talking about now. So within this, as we talk about this, let's review this one more time. As we have, so all suns are generated incandescent by two black rivers. So where do we see the idea of this black and white contrast? Where do we see that imagery? Don't we see that in the yin and the yang? Right? We see that contrast of these two concepts of white, you know, white and black, separated by what? A wave, right? Not a line, but a wave. What wave? This wave, right? This is what the yin and yang kind of is comprised of right here as we look at that. So this idea is not new. It's just being explained scientifically versus spiritually, say within Chinese culture or Chinese medicine or you know, how we want to see their Japanese, in Asian culture, put it that way. So all suns are generated into incandescence by two black rivers. Two black rivers of evacuated light. So the light is leaving, the sun's being generated. So this is sometimes where you say, what is light? It's the absence of darkness. Yeah, because as the darkness leaves, the light fills the vacuum. Right? That's just the way it is. That's just the wave. That's just the polarities. That's just the way it's happening. Conversely, right, darkness of space is radiated from two incandescent rivers of white light, which flows centrifugally from the sun's equator. So when we see the sun here, so if we see the sun as a sphere with a south and north pole, its equator would be this static axis of north and south. So from this, the Earth would be out here. And this incandescent light would be flowing centrifugally from this equator out towards the Earth. So all things would flow out this way, not this way. That's why we have, within planets, we have their rings and their orbital belts and all those things. And we see, when we see, you know, and again, I'm not a great astronomer, so I'm not going to make many claims, but the pictures I've seen of galaxies, they're not vertical, they're horizontal, right? But this is showing it being vertical, right? but they only go in one direction. They don't go, you don't have, some universes going this way and some going this way, right? They're all within the same kind of plane or idea that, even within the Big Bang Theory, right? It's like it blew up this way. Kind of didn't really show it blowing up this way too. It's always kind of showing it going in one direction, which would be the idea of this dynamic axis, right? And then everything coming off this static axis. So all the universe would be formed in this direction on the static axis or static equator. I say axis because to me it's like an axis, but it's really an equator is what Walter Russell called it. So any questions on so far and what we've talked about with this?
Well, every time I see you reading this thing about the two incandescent rivers of white light, I don't know why I keep thinking of the Milky Way.
Mm-hmm.
Huh? I mean, because you talked about galaxies before and the spiral.
And that's where the creation is being formed.
Yeah.
That's where, I mean, and if we had the time, right, if we could actually, watch the entire progression of it, we would see this happening. But we have such a short lifespan in this incarnation that we can never really see this happen because it's a very long process. The frequencies, the time frame are so long in comparison to our short life. Now, one day when time goes away, we may be able to see these things instantly, and that will be quite an amazing feat.
Yeah.
So again, as we look at things from the sun, we have this darkness of space is radiated, right, of white light, which flows centrifugally. So the darkness of space is radiated. It's not the heat of the sun that's radiated, right? Because the heat is actually concentrated. What's being sent out is the darkness of space, right? And it's going out centrifugally. So it's a bit of a different concept, right? So as we talk about this, right, as we talk about centrifugal and radiative and centripetal and gravitational and heat, it makes us think a little bit about some of the concepts that we may have. So again, here I think you were talking about, here's these nebula that we're talking about and the way they're being created. And again, they're being created in, the flatness almost of one direction. So here we go. So this is similar to the yin yang that we talked about, right? This diagram here, the 4 rivers of light. So within this, you're seeing one river, you're seeing these 2 rivers of light. You're seeing this river of light. So these 2 rivers of light are beginning to form what we talked about here, are the incandescent spike. So all sun's generated by the 2 black rivers of evacuated light, which flow centripetally. So they're flowing centripetally, right? So as they flow centripetally, the black ones, which is what? They flow clockwise. The white light is flowing counterclockwise. Centrifugal, centripetal. Right? So
That's what goes out instead of in.
Yeah. Centripetal would be clockwise in. I mean, what we call in, corkscrew in, and then centrifugal would be counterclockwise and out. These are the
never
4.
Counterclockwise and in is never it's never in for
Centrifugal.
galaxy gravity.
No, it's always in the clockwise. And this gets back into, I believe it gets back into Dowsing and the ideas of a lot of biogeometry where the clockward spin is actually beneficial and the counterclockwise spin is detrimental based on radiation, because radiation is detrimental and gravitational may be the beneficial form. So this is, we're going to talk a little bit about the current conditions that are on our planet and why that may be being caused by this centrifugal and centrifugal action of hot and cold, and why that may be how we may need to address our bodies and our environment in order to actually overcome some of the some of the detrimental energies that are in our world today. So these are the four arms of all spiral nebulae, formed as two pairs of opposite interchanging. Let's go look at this nebula here. So we're seeing these white lights, right? We're kind of seeing this black in here too. See that? We kind of see these interchanging going on of opposite interchanging with each other to become the other two. The two black arms belong to gravity, right? Centripetal, positive, gravitational, condensing, farther, north. And the two white ones to vacuity, radiation, negative, mother, south.
Make these words up, or there were actually words before you got around to it?
No, these are the words that we talked about with what they just, these are the words that we talked about last week when I went through, I think it was last week, all the words that Walter Russell uses as synonyms for gravitation and radiation. Father sky, mother earth, negative for blue, cold. These are all words for radiation. Father sky, positive, red, hot, gravitational, condensing. Remember that? Credit. Remember all these words that we talked about last week. If you want to review last week's lecture, we talked about all that at the beginning, where I went through all the different terms that Walter Russell uses, because in order to understand Russell, you have to make sure that you get these terms in your head, because he will interchange words and mean the same thing. And if you can't follow, his synonyms that he uses, then it's very easy to get lost in his writing, because that's why I go through and try to make all things either red or blue. Red for gravitational, and blue for radiative, because these are, when we see these things, I'm trying to actually, with myself too, is to actually, when I see these are the thoughts that come to mind, so I can stay in sync with what he's saying. Because these are the two main concepts within Walter Russell's science or cosmology, or what you want to say, is that it's either a radiative force. There's actually three. There's radiative, which is the negative. There's gravitational, which is the positive, which is red, and then there's the neutral or centering as we pass through the equators. There's really the three states of the wave, but there's really only two directions of force. So the electric universe is curved. So we can see this here within this curved idea here, where motion ceases. Okay, so electric universe is curved, motion is spiral. Where motion ceases, curvature ceases. Cleavages between wave field boundary planes of crystals separate them into their individual crystal forms. Motion cannot pass through those planes, for there is not the stillness there. Motion is repeated in all wave fields. So we have to look at different, the difference between a wave and a wave field by reflected extensions from wave field boundary planes. So this is kind of a heady concept here, but we've covered some of this before. If you remember the cubosphere, I think that was like 3 times ago, but we really got into the idea that these planes were being formed by these axes, and this is kind of the look at that. If you guys remember these planes here, right? This plane and this plane and this plane. So we have a 2-dimensional plane here, right? And then we make it into a 3-dimensional plane. And then so we have a plane here. Can everybody see that plane there, right? That's a plane. This is a plane here, which you can't really see the back side of it. And then this is the 3rd plane here, which forms the 3 dimension. So within this forms the cubosphere. So the corners of this form the cube, which is what Walter would call the radiative or the female or the negative plane. So the radiative is a cube, And within these are spheres which are formed by the gravitational, and they are reflected by these planes. But these are what we would call the wave field boundaries. And they're just reflected back and mirrored. So as we look at this here, you know, this is the curvature that we're talking about. This is the light rays are radial when projected through spherical planes. So they're coming this way, right? Because we have a sphere. So if you have a sphere and you have a center and you have these light waves coming in, they are going to be radial, right? Because they're going to a center point. And so think of a pin cushion as a ball. And as you put the pins in towards the center, they are actually radial, right? They point in, but they are radiating out, right? So so think of this as like a pin cushion, as these being pins being poked in at 90 degrees to the surface, but each surface area will change the direction of the angle at a 90 degree, right? So as they point in, they form a radial thing. So motion cannot pass through those planes, for this is not but stillness. There is motion repeated in all wave fields by reflected extensions from wave fields. So the reflected extensions are from these. So think of these, and they did this. If you go to philosophy.org, which is the Walter Russell site, there is a segment on this little cube they made where they put mirrors inside of it and it reflects the universe. And these were actually shown as mirrored planes. And when you looked in it, you saw just this constant growing, multiplicity of lights and universes and things, because it was all being reflected by these mirrors, or what we call wave fields here by Walter Russell boundaries. So curvature is imperative under such conditions for opposed. So this is why Walter Russell's saying the Earth is a sphere. So this whole concept of this way the light's working, how the radiation's coming in, how it's radial, how the gravitation's working, it's because of this idea of this, spherical, and we're going to get into this a bit next here. So curvature is imperative under such, for opposed pressures resist each other, and each must bend to the other to find passage for its own expression of force. Motion and curvature simultaneously begin and end when opposition begins and ends. So here's 0 in figure 39. So here's 0. So as this curvature begins and ends, this is why Walter Russell's saying that the Earth is a sphere, because of the way that the forces are working of radiation and gravitation, and how they set up in 90-degree angles to the surface. Because what we're going to find here as we move forward is that they're going to form a cone, the cone that we saw earlier. So that cone, as we have each of these waves coming into a center, they will reach to the center, but as they radiate out, they will form a cone. And that is the cone that we see that we talked about, earlier in some of the force diagrams. So curvature is imperative under such conditions. Each wave field is like a separate projection machine, which with its own curved motion picture universe is duly projected upon its self-measured zero screen of space. So again, this gets back to what we talked about as the second concept that Walter Russell wants to stress, that everything is a projection machine. Okay, not a machine that we would say would actually build something, but it's an illusion. It's a projection. It's a cinematic projection. Not a mechanical projection, a cinematic projection. It's an illusion. In which its own curved motion picture universe is duly projected upon its self-measured zero screen of space. A in figure 39. So here's A, here's A. We talked about this. These are the octaves. So on the 8 corners, these are the 8 octaves that we're going to get into next week. I'm going to discuss that in greater detail. So A in the incandescent sphere of light, which centers its pictures, the forms of desire. So if you guys remember way back when we talked about desire from source, that is what the imagination of God puts forth. The greater the desire, the greater the form. In the measure of desire for manifestation. So the manifestation is based on desire, and it's in the degree of the measure of desire. So if we are divine beings created in the image of God, can we manifest based on our desire? And based on the measure of our desire?
Thoughts.
Thoughts, correct. Thoughts, desires, emotion, right?
It's actually stated like a separate projection machine.
But again, it's a projection.
Like those machines I've been talking about.
No, your machines actually are projecting mechanics. They're not, it's an illusion, Doug.
No, like,
It's an illusion. It's an illusion.
It's all an illusion, though.
But it's not projecting a reality. It's not projecting a reality. It's projecting an
It's
illusion.
projecting matter.
No, yeah, but that's an illusion.
Right.
So
And all I'm saying, he's also saying it here. I'm not saying anything else. The show looks like that fits right in a separate projection machine.
from a sphere, from a sphere.
Where's from its own Hershey? The sphere is just the fact that battery magnetic fields are always curved.
Well, the Earth's a sphere. That's what we're looking at here. See this diagram here?
I get it.
What's this?
But it doesn't have to be a sphere. That just happens to be the one mistake he made. Everything else works. It's just not a sphere.
Well, okay. Well, again, it's a projection. It's a projection machine of a reality of light and color, right? And of substance. So it is projecting from a sphere that we have, that we're on, outward, all the way around, not in one direction, all sides. So each wave field, like a separate projection machine, in which its own curved motion picture universally is duly projected upon its self-measured zero screen of space. So we have this whole thing. There's multiple projection screens. There's multiple. It's not just one reality. There's multiple projection screens, multiple spheres, multiple cubes.
144,000.
No, because it's self-measured.
Yeah.
It's like it's limited, in
Yeah.
a certain well, anyway. It's limited in space, it's limited with the pressure, it's in a certain shape, it's in a certain, I'm getting, you said degree before, so measure of desire. So we can create something pretty divine, or we can create something not that good, depending
On our desire.
how much we focus and how much energy we put in, or what sound we make.
Because I think that when he uses the motion picture, right?
Yeah, well,
we have to go back to machines too. So
obviously,
what Walter Russell says is that machines have no knowing, they have no nothing, right? So what is being created is our manifestation. Machines can't manifest. We are the manifesting. We are the manifesting machine. We are, not a machine itself. Machines don't manifest. So we are the ones who are manifesting the reality. Not a separate machine.
Our thoughts are electric.
Yes, exactly. So we are the manifestors. We are the machine. We are the thing that is creating this. We are the one that is projecting.
Facing with those machines is what it really is.
We are the machine. We are the one that is projecting. It is through us that all reality is created.
Yes, I agree.
we are the observer.
Yes.
Okay?
And
If we can step back, we can observe what's the motion that's happening or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The question is, at what level are you observing?
Yeah, well, we try to be as high as possible. It takes time, and
So I think each person has a different level of manifestation.
it happens at
Observation.
certain time. It's like,
Because some people are on a very base level of observation, right? They only they just see, you know, the sunrise and sunset. Some people don't even see that, right? They just see their alarm clock. They don't even see their sun. They just see 7:30 or 9:30. You know, 7:30 get up, 9:30 bed, or whatever. They don't.
oh,
really-
they don't hear the birds. Like right
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
the birds are singing in the morning, eh?
So,
I open my window and I hear the birds, and I know spring is coming. It's
Mhm.
interesting. You think about the birds singing, it's the sound.
Mhm.
They got a part to play, eh?
Mhm.
That sound they're making, I'm sure it cycles, and they're singing at this, they're not singing in winter, they sing now. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's a cycle for this. They're part of that cycle. They got their, anyway, sound.
So let's go back. So we're looking at figure 38, 39. This curve unit consists of lenses and mirrors of light which reflect, bend, curve, concentrate, and disintegrate light into countless forms. Any action anywhere is repeated everywhere by and through countless mirror planes of wave fields and the lenses of space. Concentrated spheres such as the Earth, and Sun are surrounded by layers of light of equal pressures. Clouds float around the Earth, not over, around the Earth, in them. The reason they float in curves parallel to the Earth is because of the spherical equipotential planes of pressure which curve as the Earth curves. So we see, you know, these ideas here, right? Rain falls vertically from cones. So what's happening here as we have the clouds above, right? The raindrop is headed towards the center of the Earth on a curved surface. That curved surface, as each raindrop falls, they are not parallel. They are going to a central point, as in a perspective. That central point that they go to forms a cone.
How do the chemtrails stay so straight then? I'm just wondering.
Mathematics.
Well, again, I think it's not, I mean, I think that's a perception thing. It's just like as we look at, you know, because our perspective is,
Well, I look at the damn thing and it's straighter than an arrow. You know,
well,
I've never.
it depends. I've seen some that are curved. I've seen some that
Yeah,
are
but a
curved.
lot. Okay.
So I mean, I don't think
Not some that are just so straight. It's like how does it stay so straight?
I do not know, but some are. I've seen some that are very, you know, curvy in different ways. Not all are. They try. I think they try to do that just to do it in rows. But
You know that example with the rain? Is it okay? I mean, I know he's not showing that, but when we have trees,
Mm.
doesn't it call, like, just the way the trees or the plants, doesn't it call for rain? Like if you have that, then the clouds can form. You know, I'm talking about the
The
whole
negative.
synthesis and all this. So as we have more trees, I mean, I think it does something that it calls the rain, and I'm just calling it like that. I have no idea. And something,
I would
there
think.
must be a process involved.
Well, I think that the tree would off gas moisture, right? Which would then go into the sky more too, which would then actually seed the sky in a different way. So I think that because where you have arid areas, you don't really have any moisture returning to the sky. So
Yeah.
I think that as you have, you know, dews and things created that are captured by the leaves and by the water, you may. So we talked about the concentrated spheres such as the Earth. So curved pressure of light acts as lenses to multiply and divide light radially. Light rays which pass through curved planes concentrate toward a point when projected through light lenses of space in the convex direction and disintegrate when they pass through the concave direction. So as you look at the Earth, supposedly, right, the sphere of the Earth that we've talked about, and you have these planes, right? See these planes here, which are these what we call static axes, right? These are the static axes. These are the dynamic axes, which go from the center of the Earth to the center of the sun. These would be concave, right? And coming this way and convex. So as we have these convex and concave, we would see that this in this way would be convex, right? Because what does it say here? Convex is decentrative. In the space in the convex direction and decentrative when they pass through the concave. So they decentrate. So as we can see here, so as these waves flow this direction, which is in the concave, right? This circle is in a concave towards the flow of this energy. They disintegrate, they radiate back, right? As they hit this wave, which would be convex, right, going away from the wave's coming in this way. The semicircle is, it's greater on the ends than in the center, so this would be considered convex. You guys understand what I'm saying there? So if I was to, so from here in this direction like this, and that circle, as this energy hits this shape is what we would call convex to this angle, right? Because this is not encompassing the force coming down. If the force was this way, that would be concave, right? Because this is closer than this, right? So it's a concave. So what we're saying here is that the forces that come out here, if this is the wave field, this is concave to the energy that's coming out this wave, it's decentrative, it's radiative, it's cold, it's mother, it's negative, going back into space, expanding into greater volume. As it comes down this way, the radiation hits this curvature. This is why the Earth has to be curved in order to make this theory work. It begins to concentrate and form the planet and form matter.
And you say the pressure is pushing it in, isn't it? Like the pressure, you know what I mean?
Well, all the gravitational pressures that we've talked about, because this, as this sphere becomes smaller to the expanse of space, these pressures become greater, just as we talked about in that diagram. If you remember, we had the small positive and the large negative. And what would we see? We saw the curve, right? We saw actually saw the curve in a convex towards the positive. You remember that? So, any more questions on the convex and concave and why it disintegrates and why it concentrates based on the curvature?
Just an extraneous observation. Seems to be there's no room for flat Earth here.
I think within Walter Russell's ideas, and this is why I think it's very important to read what he writes, is because the idea that there are now, I will say that you can have a flat Earth, but I don't think we'd be living on it, because we would be at a sense where the Earth would be flattened over time as it would be degenerating back into itself. So unless we are on a ghost planet, then I don't think it's flat. I think I think it has to be a sphere within Walter Russell's cosmology to be inhabitable by us.
Or CPU metaverse kind of thing.
Yeah.
We are in a machine, not to face it.
So gravity and radiativity. So gravity, red, hot, positive, radiativity, cold, negative, mother, south. Are
What does radiativity mean?
it means it's radiating out.
Not like it's not radioactive. It's something else, right?
Well, again, radioactivity and radiation, again, are the ideas that yes, there is a because as this, okay, so what's coming from the sun? Is the sun putting out gravitation or radiation?
Electricity.
No, it's putting out radiation. We just talked about
Yes,
that.
radiation, it has to be.
Yeah, it's radiation coming out, okay? And as radiation comes out, back to this form again, back to this drawing, as the radiation comes out and it hits the convex, it turns into gravitation, right? As it leaves, it goes back from gravitation into radiation, expansiveness. So it as it hits this, it concentrates, forms matter. As it goes back out, it begins to break up to return to source, right? So solidity will not return to source. Only the fine particles will turn back to the sun and be absorbed by the sun and then be recondensed by gravitation. The same, and that's why Walter Russell's saying that the sun's that's why he's saying that everything's a sphere, based on these concepts of this dynamic or static axis that is curved, forming either a convex or a concave plane energy field that once the wave passes through, either becomes radiative or becomes gravitational. Becomes radiation or gravitation based upon the sphere and how the wave and the axis, because as we look at these axes here, I don't know where I put that drawing. I think it's back.
It happened without the physical body being curved. It could all happen when the energy is curved.
Again, but
Doesn't need the Earth itself to be curved from what he's writing.
Well, here's the thing, Doug. I mean, if you have a flat plane and a concave structure here, right? Then as they pass through, they wouldn't be going to the center. They'd all be going off. There'd be no center.
The thing on top. What's the curved thing?
What? The field. Because here's what you're explaining is that, let me get rid of this here and draw a little bit better. What you're explaining is that as the if we had a flat plane, let's draw it this way. So here's the flat plane that we're talking about, right? Here's flat Earth. And you're saying that there's going to be a curved field, right?
No, I'm saying that the magnetic energy runs in, surrounds it in a curved, in a curved field, but it doesn't have to be there. It moves all the time.
But what I'm saying is that for Russell, as they pass through this plane, they go to the center. Okay.
Why couldn't they?
At a 90, again, they can do whatever, you can have it do whatever you wish. What I'm saying is that what Russell's saying is that it hits this at a 90-degree towards the center. You have a flat and you have a curve, as it would hit the 90 degrees, it would not go to the center. The center would be offset. It would not, the only way that you can get from an axis in the center of the sun to the center of the Earth is through a curved field on a curved surface.
I don't see why it has to be a curved surface. I see the curved field concept. I'm with you. I don't see scientifically why it couldn't, work with it. The energy field is designed, specifically to do what he's saying, to go to the center.
Because once you have a curve, and if you have an angle at a 90-degree to that curve, it cannot intersect a flat plane and go to the center. Where is the center? If what you're saying, where is the center that these things are going to? Is it here? that the center? Is this the center?
You further down. Where is it on Earth? The core?
That be the center of the sphere that we talk about in all the other diagrams.
Why can't the center be down right there? Make a center. Put an X there. There you go. There's a center.
Well,
You're saying like you can't though, and I don't get that. I don't get how you can't have a round thing that has a center 100 meters down, and there's a center. Everything goes in, hits that center. Why is that impossible?
because based on this diagram right here, if this is flat like this,
Okay, I'd buy that.
right? If this is flat, then these, when they hit this curvature of space, they will not, I mean, where would your center be? Are you saying that, because this is coming in all directions too, don't forget, it's all coming in all directions. Not just one.
I feel like it could be, but I'm not going to, fight about it. It's okay. I get it. I mean, that's what we're talking about what Russell
Exactly.
believes.
Exactly.
Changes, I realize that.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about what he believes, what he is stating. So that's what this study is about, right? And so do I think that Russell believes in a spherical Earth? Yes. Do I think
Yeah, I agree.
do I believe that his entire body of work is based on sphericals, planes, and curvatures? And yes, I do believe that. I do believe all that. Now, is it true? I don't know, but that's what Russell says. If we're going to use Russell as a metric, then we have to use his science. And within this science, he definitely says it's a sphere, the Earth's a sphere, and that the fields around it are spheres. And in order to have his mathematics work, or whatever we're going to say, his physics work, they have to be based on those solids. They don't work with other solids. So that's all I'm saying. So curved pressures of light act as lenses to multiply and divide light radially. Light rays which pass through curved planes concentrate toward a point when projected through a lens of space in the convex. We just talked about that, right? And decentrate when they pass through a concave. So blue, disintegrate, radiate, whatever you want to say, dissipate, right? All the same words. Negative, go to space, grow, get bigger. What happens to their frequency? It lessens, right? When the light wave, when the radiative wave from the sun hits the convex, radiates heat, right? That's why we feel heat. So we don't feel cold from the sun. It's hitting the convex field, which then is making it into a gravitational heat wave, right? So that is the ideas that Russell is proposing. So gravity and radiativity are accounted for by this fact. Every object which falls toward the Earth falls radially toward its center. Back to this eye concept here. Right? Falls towards its center. Therefore, you have to have a center of the mass. And so again, I think if you had a flat Earth, a big cube, and you had its center, if you were on the far side, you'd see it fall at an angle, right? Because it has to be falling towards the center of the mass. So if I drop something, you'd see it go to 45 if I was on the far edge.
Well, that's if you have a physical flat thing.
Yeah, like a flat mass, right? Because you have the center of the mass somewhere.
There's an energy field, though, a machine that creates it. And it could be any shape it wants. It could make a curve for you, so you can say it works.
Or you can say it's a sphere. I mean, yes.
It could, yeah. But how is it if it's a sphere? Where's the below? What's above is below. How does it get under there if it's a solid Earth?
How does what get under there?
Like a tornado, you have the above and the below part. How could that work if it's round?
Because
Where's the other half? In other words, if you have just take a simple tornado, it's just on the top, no, the bottom side also, above and below.
Well, it would go to, I mean, I would say that its actual energy field would probably go all the way to the center of the Earth, but its actual physical form would actually stop at its plane of its actual plane, which would be the Earth's surface. You know, its energy field. So the Earth's surface is an energy field, which things would stop at. So I would say that they would stop at that energy field and not go all the way through. Now, when you talk to, Abraham Karim, and I think we shared about this, Abraham Karim's the biogeometry founder, is that he's saying that the light waves actually pass through the Earth, right? They're radiative on the top, but they are actually what he would call negative green on the bottom, on the dark side of the planet. And that's why we rest at night, because these waves that are coming through are actually healing us. So within biogeometry, the theory of a spherical Earth is also prominent within Abraham Karim's books. And
Does it work or doesn't work?
it's a spherical Earth
For Kareem, you're saying.
for Karim. And again, for Steiner, if you want to talk Steiner, he talks about the eighth sphere, not the eighth plane. And if you study who Steiner studied, which is Goethe has a lot of work based on spheres.
So did I start something here?
No, I don't. I think you do what you started. But yes. So, but what I'm trying to say here is that if you follow the body of works of different people, a lot of their theories or cosmologies are based on spheres, whether it be the music of the spheres or the spherical shape, to achieve the outcomes that they're proposing. And within this, I mean, this whole thing is really based on a spherical Earth to have these type of diagrams and geometry work. The geometry doesn't work within a flat space. Now, like I said, if you want to convolute a flat thing with, I mean, you can do that, but that's not what Russell's talking about.
We're talking about Russell, and that's why I shut up.
Yeah.
Well, because it's true. We're studying Russell.
Yeah. So,
He is.
so gravity and radiativity are accounted for by this fact. Every object which falls towards the Earth radial toward the center because of this fact. No two men who stand upright in balance with gravity stand parallel to each other. Lines drawn through the feet and head of any two men standing in either hemisphere would form a cone, which is the base in the heavens and its apex at the Earth's center. So this is where, again, we get back to what he's explaining here. It's a center, and I don't know why they put the diagram so far away, but so here's the men standing on this curved surface of the Earth, right? As these lines, which are the lines which we would call the dynamic axis, right? The dynamic axis would go back to this concept here, which I've tried to put, which is here, right? So here's the dynamic axis right here, right? So this is from the sun to the Earth, okay? I mean, this is these are the poles. Here's the axis, so it's a static axis. So within this, we would have this idea that these lines are coming down, forming these dynamic axes, and to the center of the Earth, which then would form these cones, which would then go back. So the way this works, because if the sun is say a stagnant body, right? It's a still body, and we face it at one time. So there has to be either two concepts happening here. One, the sun has got to be here, right? And we're spinning, so that this radiation happens across the entire surface, right? Because the sun's in one place. Either the sun's in one place and we're spinning around it, which is, allowing this to happen on all sides and all faces of the Earth, right? Or the sun is spinning and around us. But in order to get this concept to work, one has got to be traveling around the other. Because we have to have these rays, right, coming down on all sides.
Everything runs in cycles as well.
Correct. So one thing that I did say that I wanted to talk about before we finished up here, and I just kind of want to throw it out as a teaser, is the idea, since we talk a lot about radiation and gravitation, one of the lectures or dialogues that was had by Alphabetic on last week was the idea that our current maladies that plague our existence is really a radiation poisoning.
Unquestionably.
And so I actually looked up on PubMed, you know, if there was any scientific or medical discussion about this topic in the mainstream. And I did find articles that were related to the idea that the current condition is a radiation injury. And
That's not the best article here.
excuse me?
That's not the best article. It's actually an article that says 5G causes coronavirus structures in skin.
Well, and that's fine.
On PubMed.
Yeah. And but what this is talking about is a little bit about some of the symptoms and what is actually occurring and what are the, and I have some other articles too here, you know, which talk about it, which is, you know, these perineal like lesions. And what I was not aware is that a lot of people are actually experiencing these perineal type lesions.
Don't worry, they'll kill all those people that are saying it.
So what a perineal type lesion is, it's kind of a red spot that is on the body, and it actually what perineal is actually a condition that occurs when you kind of get frostbite, and you get a red kind of raised area on the skin.
I've seen a lady had it all over her legs and stuff.
Yeah. And that is so, and I have some of those. I have some of those perineal type lesions. And what I found is that if I actually put iodine on them, they go away. And iodine is actually a treatment for radiation poisoning.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
So, you know, so the idea that when we talk about Russell and we talk about radiation and we talk about gravitation and we find that radiation is actually cold, not hot. And so that a radiation poisoning would actually maybe mimic the skin issues that are actually shown during frostbite or cold would then make sense. So as we see, and I didn't realize how pronounced a lot of this was in the population of these perineal-like lesions on people that were suffering from this radiation sickness that's throughout. But as we've talked about, and I was talking about earlier, as we study Russell and we study the ideas of radiation and gravitation, if this is a radiation sickness, what would then counter the radiation would be gravitation.
We also wear these, these devices that supposedly harmonize it.
Yeah, but are those actually like producing more gravitational field, right? It's like this.
It's the orgone stuff.
Well, again, what I'm trying to get at is that the counter to radiation is gravitation. So is that really what's being produced? Are we actually producing a centripetal wave that is counterproductive or counteracting the centrifugal wave of the radiation? And it might be interesting to explore that idea.
How would you imagine it could be done?
Well, I think to actually look at the wave structures, you know, by using some of the, you know, the electroantennas or biogeometry to actually look at what is the waveform, and if it is a radiative wave, which we know within biogeometry is also the detrimental wave, which is the counterclockwise spin of this pendulum, which is the, as we talked about earlier, the vertical wave. which is the detrimental wave. In order to counteract that wave, that centrifugal wave, you would need to actually introduce horizontal wave, which may be a horizontal wave, may actually also be looked at maybe as a gravitational wave, since we only have two waves within Walter Russell's cosmology, right? There is no
They put this already in Switzerland. EHAM, whatever, the geometry, the geometry guy, the biogeometry guy.
yes, but
Who
again,
did this in Switzerland, these same cities of this,
he
great,
trans, but
they
again,
called it something else. They called it electro smog.
yes, and but again, what I'm trying to get at here is, yes, it has been done, but I'm just saying, can we actually look at it through Walter Russell's cosmology? Can we actually look at the solution through waveform mechanics of gravitation and radiation, since those are the two waves that we're talking about, at least within Russell?
Got it.
So, I mean, is there solutions for us as a race, right, as a human population, that could be based on gravitational wave structures that would counteract the adverse effects of the radiation? And that's the only question that I'm putting forth, because of the discussions we've had with Russell. Now, within biogeometry, he makes different forms that put out different waveforms based on different planes of existence, which, these are deeper levels. He calls the planes of nature, and we talked a bit about that when we discussed the archetypal ruler. But at a base level, is it really just coming back to radiation and gravitation? Can we look at forms that generate gravitation to counteract the radiation?
So you could increase your gravitation if you get closer to the center of the Earth.
And I would think that would actually, and I think that by grounding, right? We know that by grounding, that helps within this. That is a treatment for this current condition. And
dig a big hole.
Dig a big hole. I mean, and that's really within the Eagle Medicine Ranch property that I'm looking at, is actually, setting the sweat lodge actually down in the earth more, and seeing, and creating an orgone box, right? A healing hut box that, based on orgone technologies, but within the earth itself, to see if that one.
Just make a big hole, a coffin, get in, put the dirt back.
Jump in. But I mean, are these some technologies or treatments that are no cost or minimal cost, right, to actually help regenerate our body and increase our gravitational potential?
You could go to Death Valley, the lowest point.
Mm-hmm.
You could go to the lowest point in Death Valley to get a little bit closer to the center.
Go in the ocean, right? I mean, there's different things you can do, but I think that, through how do we develop waveforms, and what waveform are we trying to produce? Because one thing that is amazing is that I was looking at, within building materials, that they actually see that radiation, comes from the sun. And so how do they mitigate radiation from the sun within building materials? Well, the number one item they use is zinc. And what is one of the treatments for the current condition?
Yeah, true.
Right?
But where would you put zinc in a house, though?
Excuse me?
In a building, I thought you said.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, could you use zinc-plated coatings like you do on your skin, right? I mean, what do surfers put on their nose? Zinc, right? Zinc oxide. Why do they do that? To reduce radiation. It's also, but isn't it amazing that that is one of the treatment protocols?
Included in it,
right? Because if we increase our zinc, we may increase our gravitation or our ability to reduce radiation. So again, it's just a thought that as we study Russell and we look at, this as maybe a radiation sickness, if we can apply some of his principles, maybe to help counteract the ill effects.
I think it'd be cool to figure out how to program some drones with magnets to rotate around you to
create a centripetal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you can create that centripetal effect through energetics.
Yeah.
And it could even be through like, within like, one other effect for radiation is to increase your phytonutrients, which have a very strong clockwise spin.
Also, like non-ionizing magnets, right? Like the old neodymium magnets can help, maybe.
Well, again, like I said, I just think it might, and I'm going to actually do some more exploration on this and do a presentation on it based on biogeometry, orgone, radiation, gravitation, and also align that with current treatments and different articles from PubMed, different.
I think